It's good information. Okay, so last week we talked about the golden thread of history. Does anybody remember exactly what that was, what we said it was?
Superintending providence of the Almighty God.
Yeah, so we specifically want to see that kind of that arc of, sorry, I thought I had it pulled up. Did we have the golden thread on the previous? Okay, here we go, sorry. So with the golden thread of history, we definitely want to see that arc of Christianity throughout history, okay? And that's what we're trying to do. Last week, Rory gave a lot of quotes, examples about the golden thread of history. Today, we'll actually start seeing some of that, keeping with his theme and where we are. So we're going to revisit Columbus. We're going to camp out on Columbus and pre-colonial America. So I will tell you that I don't have very many slides on Virginia. You're only going to see 2 or 3. I think we all know a little bit about Virginia. I'd really camp out a little bit on Columbus and the Pilgrims and the Puritans when they come in, but I do draw a conclusion or a contrast in the end with Virginia and New England, okay? Because I think it's important to see. All right, so Christopher Columbus. So the Vikings land first, we know that, but really it wasn't until Columbus's arrival that opened up the West to European colonization. So the first question I was going to pose is, what do we know about Christopher Columbus? But that's really not the question I want to ask. I know everybody can give us some really good information. Why is it that today we want to kind of eliminate Columbus from history? What is it that the world is telling us today about Columbus that is probably more negative than what we remember probably when we were in history? Anybody?
Oh, I know.
Sure.
Or I think I know. Because that was the time of the dysphoria. It's not the right word. What's the word I want to use? When they were kicking out the Jews. You either converted or you left.
Crusade.
So that, so definitely Spanish was part of that, right?
Crusade.
But the Crusades, yeah. But what is it about Christopher? So oftentimes we associate Christopher Columbus with Spain because he flew under the, he sailed under the Spanish flag. He fly the flag, but he was actually sailing, clarification. But he wasn't from Spain, he was from Italy. I think we all probably remember that. But when he got to, when he came across, found land, settled.
It's a settler thing, right? It's like a similar, they complain about Palestine, these white settlers coming in and taking over the Indian land, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so for sure there was a question about, did we take the land? Yeah. Sometimes we talk about purchasing the land. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Talk about, a lot of people like to say Christopher Columbus was crazy and just kind of stumbled upon the New World, okay? I think that we're going to find out that that's not true, okay? Why did Columbus leave for the New World? We talked about some of the things, but there's a few reasons. When I put my history hat on, I'm wandering into my thought wilderness here, but there's a few reasons why we go to someplace new.
One of the reasons I hear is for a faster trade route to the Indies, which is where we came up with.
So when we explore, we're looking for something typically, okay? We're looking for riches, we're looking for gold, we're looking for a trade route, we're looking for something to make a country prosperous, okay? How about this quote down at the bottom? I put the Psalm 65:5 up top because you're going to see it in Columbus's, and what the book says that Columbus believed. Columbus believed that it was possible to sail across the Atlantic to reach people in Asia who had never heard of the God who is the hope of all ends of the earth and the furthest seas. And he's referencing Psalm 65:5 there. So, knowing this, for Columbus, this is a mission trip. Okay, it's important to know this is a mission trip. Okay, now he couldn't get Italy to get on board with him. He was able to get Spain to get on board with him, but it's important to know that for Christopher Columbus, it's a mission trip. Okay.
Technically, that's how it got funded by Isabel. Ferdinand and Isabel, when they got married, they united Spain, but she was the religious one, he was the political one.
Thank you.
I think it was she that funded the trip, was it?
She funded it. Right. She did. Okay, so Columbus lands, he comes over, he's on his mission trip, he interacts with 2 principal tribes, okay, first trip. Tejano and Caribs are Canips, okay? I didn't do a whole lot of research into the tribes themselves because I'm focusing on Columbus. According to the book, there's a couple of things that are answered. Did he pillage and destroy? Not really. Did he enslave or forcibly take natives back to Spain? That's a little bit questionable, okay? And the reason it is he did not take anybody. There was the Taínos and the Caribs were rival tribes, okay? Does anybody know this story?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a pretty bad story. So I'm not going to go into detail. Again, the book. But the Taínos were raided many times by the Caribs from Caribbean, but also Cannibs, which is in reference to.
They were
Cannibals.
cannibals.
Okay. And so it's very difficult for me to pick out the right language here. There are certain situations where society might give a little bit of grace to cannibalism, survival, something like that. In history, warring tribes, there might be cannibalism there. This is far worse than any of that you can imagine. Okay, this had to do with slavery, and it had to do with regular diet of their enemies. Okay, so I won't say anything more about that other than it was horrific. If you read the book, you'll realize it'll open your eyes a little bit more. So Columbus heard about this during his first trip. He goes back to Spain, and then he comes back for a second. In all, he makes 4 trips. Okay, when he comes back the second time, some people had stayed. They heard about what was going on with the other tribes, so they did go. They liberated some of the Taínos from the Caribs. There was a fight there. So there were some prisoners that were taken back to Spain, but they were part of the warring tribe.
Excuse me, Jen. Hi, everybody. So we got, I don't know if you noticed, we have 5 copies of this book, and we have 5 copies of volume 2 on the resource table if anybody wants to buy them.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank
And you can also buy them from wall builders. Sorry, Jen.
Oh, you're good. Thank you, sir. It was his second trip where the Spaniards kind of turned on him a little bit. They arrested him for crimes that they were committing. They sent him back in shackles. King and Queen said no, they recognized it wasn't true. He did come back 2 more times. He had several of the friendly tribe, the Taínos, volunteered to travel back to Spain. One became part of the Spanish royal court. Okay, that's not enslavement. That's not forcing somebody to go back. And one actually continued to travel with Columbus as an interpreter. Okay, so quick question: what's the one thing that you really need in your interpreter other than the language?
Trust.
Trust. Okay. I think that if Columbus did not have trust and they did not have a mutual trust there, you would not have had this relationship. So, in all, efforts to discredit Columbus, it's really irrational. Okay. But when you think about the colonization, it didn't quite happen right away, right? I mean, there were ships going back and forth, but if you read here what the book says, Return to the Golden Thread, it's significant that while Columbus receives credit for discovering the New World and opening Western Hemisphere to European colonization, neither he nor Spain actually colonized much of what would become the United States. This is providential, for at that time Spain often practiced both civil and religious oppression, which is what everybody was talking about when we were talking about Columbus in the beginning. For example, some of the Spanish monarch who funded Columbus' voyages also created the Spanish Inquisition in 1478 and expelled Jews from Spain in 1492. 1492. Okay. So this is all about the same time. It's not a reflection of Columbus. This is a reflection of Spain. Okay. So we talk about that golden thread and God's providence. This is what I completely find fascinating. Yeah. God held that the vast land in reserve as this vast land, this is America, which the experiment was to be made in favor of civil and religious liberty. He suffered not the foot of the Spaniard or Portuguese or Frenchman or Englishman to come upon until the changes had been wrought in Europe. Wrought in Europe is the Reformation, which would make it certain that it would always be a land, not land of freedom. B.F. Morris. B.F. Morris, historian, be careful who you look up. There's a couple changes wrought in Europe. The Reformation. Reformation started in 1517. Well, okay, Martin Luther, but we can go back if we want to. Needed time to spread. So if I go, let's see, read something out of the book for y'all. I got a note. I took full advantage of the notes in Microsoft PowerPoint. The comparison of our government with those of Europe are like a comparison of heaven and hell. And talking about the religious freedoms or lack thereof. The Bible was so influential in the birth, growth, and development of the United States that even publications such as Newsweek acknowledge that historians are discovering that the Bible, perhaps even more than the Constitution, is our founding document. Okay. So let's get into that just a little bit. Okay, but first we're gonna make a quick sidestep to Virginia. I think most of us have a pretty good idea of Virginia. A lot of it has to do with the popularity of Pocahontas in the movie and people wanting to know about her. And she was definitely friendly. But I wanted to go back and look. The Charter of Virginia stated that the colony was founded, among other reasons, to propagate the Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God. So we have, even though we're going to draw some comparisons, my wife's looking at me smiling. I think we should applaud. You know, it just dawned on me. It just dawned on me. We jumped right into the material so quick. I don't know everybody in this room. My name is Gent Lewis, by the way. G-E-N-T. It's on a lot of the bathroom doors. My thing is, it's plural, and I'm the only guy that I've ever met with the name of Gent. I mean, there's some gentries, but it's really not the same thing. So I'm wondering why they pluralize the bathroom doors. Because to me, I get my own. Most places I go, this is my lovely wife, Heather. Homeschooler of 4 children. She's done a great job, and none of y'all made me nervous now that my wife is here. I feel like it's our first date. I'm a little bit jittery. Where were we? Virginia. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to point out was Virginia is definitely important in the shaping of our country. Okay. For right now, we're only going to give a quick slide. We're going to come back to it at the end. Many great stories have come out of Virginia. I don't want to make light of Virginia, but I want to really save it for the contrast. But I did want to give a nod because we all know who Pocahontas is. She really did save John Smith's life. She married a pastor. If it wasn't for her, she really bridged the gap there and really helped the colonists. In fact, some people say that if it wasn't for her, that they would not have survived. Okay, here's where I want to go. I want to go to the Pilgrims, the Plymouth colony. So for making the declaration on top, there could be but one head to the church, and that head was not the Queen, but Christ. Okay, that proclamation got John Greenwood executed. Okay, so what do you do? What do you do if you're a Christian and they're, somebody is speaking the truth, right? The first thing that the people at the time did is they stayed a few years and they tried. Okay, William Bradford, we talked about him last week. Have a couple of quotes here. First, the Pilgrims go to Holland. Okay, and I have a quote here about the Christians going to Holland. Okay, and then to America. Okay. After living under persecution, they left Holland as well. So they were persecuted wherever they went, okay? So they were not satisfied. They were primarily concerned over their children's faith, okay? They liked kind of the English way of life, but they wanted religious freedom. They didn't want to be persecuted. So they set their sights on
Virginia.
specifically Virginia, okay? So they commissioned two ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. We know about the Mayflower. How come we don't know about the Speedwell? Because it didn't make it. The question is, why did it not make it? Does anybody know the story of the Speedwell? It's actually important when we see the ark and we see God's providence and we see things that are happening. So, turnaround went back. They suspected that it was sabotage. Okay? They felt like they were vindicated in their suspicion because the Speedwell did sell to another company and it did make a passage to America without the Pilgrims. So what do you do when you have two ships full of Pilgrims wanting to come to the U.S. and one of them gets turned around and does not sell? You take as many as you can and put them on the Mayflower. Okay, not all. Some stay behind. So, one interesting thing from the Mayflower that I learned in the book that I had not heard of, but probably many of y'all have, John Howland. Who knows the story of John Howland? Lots of descendants come from him. I only put a few.
President fell overboard.
He did fall overboard.
Yeah.
Thank you. What happened when he fell
They
overboard?
saved him, but he was related to the president. The
He
guy
wa-
fell over.
He
They
fell up.
saved him, yeah.
He fell over. They would not be able to go back and get him. Not a strong swimmer, okay? Found a rope,
Found the rope, yeah.
grabbed the rope, got on, and was saved. It's interesting when you think about, when you're just truly hanging on by a rope. So from him, we get, over 1 million descendants today, okay? 3 presidents. I didn't put everybody in here. Emerson, Longfellow, actors, Hollywood actors, signer of the Constitution. So when they land, they run into a couple of friends. One first. Samoset, I don't know how to pronounce that. Samoset, I'm going to say. Do y'all remember who he is? Or Squanto. Y'all know Squanto? Okay. Samoset introduced Squanto to the Pilgrims. Samoset was an English speaker. He was a Native American. He was an Indian. He was an English speaker. He learned to speak from fishermen that would come up. So even though the Mayflower did not, I asked you a question, they were on their way to Virginia. The reason that John Howland went overboard was because the seas were so rough, it was overcrowded. There's all kinds of story here. They ended up pushing north and landing in Plymouth, okay? So even up in Plymouth where they landed, some of the Indians had seen English speakers before, to the point to where Samoset had learned English, okay? All right, so Squanto now learned English a different way. Squanto learned English. A lot of people know who Squanto is, so anybody want to help me out here? He was enslaved, taken to Europe, purchased out of slavery, okay, taught English, came back, and he was uniquely equipped because the land that the Pilgrims landed on was the land of his ancestors. The land of his ancestors got wiped out in some sort of plague or something. Is this not crazy? So he knew the land, he knew the land, he knew the language, So the Mayflower has this horrible trip over. It was so rough that the main mast broke, okay? I'm gonna get way behind because it's just, I don't even have a slide for it, but there's just so much, and I really encourage you to get the book. The main mast broke, but the Pilgrims, as we know, they were big into education, they were big into reading, they were big into translation. Holland made them stop all that. For some reason, they brought part of their press over. Okay, when the main mast broke, they didn't have conventional tools to fix the press, but they had a big jack screw to fix the main beam, but they had a big jack screw that they were able to use. God is good. I'm just telling you, God is good. So then they land on Squanto's family's land, and he knows how to help them. And he speaks their language. Who would have thought? So Thanksgiving is where we get a little bit sideways with culture today, because Thanksgiving was bad if you listen to a lot of people. So what have we recently been hearing about Thanksgiving? These are some of the myths and tales that we talk about. So what are we hearing about Thanksgiving today? Maybe different than your history book.
Let's hear about giving blankets that have the flu on them or something.
Yeah, so for sure, there were some vaccines that the Europeans had that the Native Americans didn't have, and so that is horrible. Yeah, it is, but it's not that it's not biological warfare, right? We didn't bring disease to try to wipe anybody out. In fact, the Pilgrims were coming; they were witnessing to the Native Americans. They were forming a friendship with Squanto's help. Okay, they had a harvest. They almost starved the first winter. They landed when it was really, really cold. Okay, everybody when they first landed, the survival rate was really bad. Okay, but Squanto helped. They have food. They have food to share. They want to invite their new friends over. The chief brought 90 warriors to the Thanksgiving to celebrate. 90 warriors. They had such a good time. They stayed for 3 days. It's a good party. Or they're like some of your relatives where you keep trying. That joke got way too many laughs. So I'm just... Okay, so the Pilgrims. 4 women, 14 young boys and girls, 13 infants and children, only 22 men. If you think about those numbers, think about the loss of life. 4 women, 14 young boys and girls, 13 infants and children, only 22 men. If that was not a good relationship against 90 warriors, the Pilgrims did not stand a chance.
Yeah.
They stayed for 3 days because they had fun. They played games. Okay. Then came a drought. Okay. I will say one thing real quick. The one thing, do y'all notice that I skipped over something really important? When we were talking last week, we talked about how the Bible was influential in the country and the shaping of a lot of our documents. Is there anything that the Mayflower is famous for?
The Geneva Bible and the
Okay.
Mayflower Conference. Yeah.
Noticeably invisible, we will get there, I promise. Okay? The drought. Okay? So there's a drought. In fact, everybody was worried. Even the Native Americans were worried. And so, what do you do when you need God's help? You go to Him in prayer. And if we read this, now I see, and I really pay attention to how the rain impacted the crop. Now I see that Englishman's God is good God, for He hath heard of you and sent you rain. Okay, now who is saying this? This is a Native American speaking to a pilgrim, and the pilgrim documented what he said. Okay, and that, speaking of the rain, and that without storms or tempest and thunder, which usually we have with our rain. Sorry for my English there. Which breaks down our corn, but yours stands whole and still good. Surely your God is a good God. Okay. Before we go too much further, one of the things I wanted to say was, there are some wars. I don't really talk about them here in this presentation. The wars between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans were primarily attributed to the the Pilgrims' influence over the Native Americans and them holding them accountable to things like torture, war crimes, things like that. Because remember, the Native Americans were fighting amongst themselves. They were territorial. They were tribal. There were 3,500 praying Indians. Okay, what they call praying Indians that had converted to Christianity. Really fascinating story. That was the largest loss of life in those wars, were Native Americans killing the praying Indians. I think 1,500 of them lost their lives. Really sad. Okay. I wanted to focus on the impact of the Bible, though, and the application of the Bible. But I wanted to set the stage of, again, this is mission work. A lot of this is mission work. The Pilgrims are not coming over for riches, they're coming over for freedom. So, if we were to stop and take note of all the different settlers coming over, the different colonies that were being formed, I put down a few of how the Bible was being applied to the documents. The Mayflower Compact was one of them. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Okay, I put a quote in there. This was the one that was most in line with the United States, with where we started writing our Constitution and our documents. Okay, Massachusetts Body of Liberties, Frame of Government of Pennsylvania. So at this point, the Puritans had followed the Pilgrims to America. The Puritans stayed behind because they were still trying to get freedom in Europe. Okay, in each of the settlement, the Pilgrim and the Puritans all did certain things. Okay, the first thing that they would do is they would buy their land from the Native Americans that were there, or the Indians that were there. Okay, they would buy it. They would negotiate at an agreed upon price. Okay, they would use the Bible as the basis for governing. Every time you turn to governing up in the North England, where the Puritans and the Pilgrims were, they were using the Bible as the basis. They were spreading the gospel and they were teaching. Okay, that's what they were focused on. Now, Jamestown versus Plymouth. Virginia colonists, part of the official state-sponsored Anglican Church of England. Okay. In Virginia, the king owned the land. They just came. I mean, he declared it as his. Virginia relied heavily on the government, and religious toleration was less part of their spiritual DNA than it was in England. In fact, Virginians, we talked about the relationship and the friendship that they had and the help that they received. The Virginians actually believed that the Indians owed them, and that was part of the contentious part of it. The more you helped, the more you owed. Why? Because they came from something that was already what we would consider to be, pretty socialistic. There was a heavy reliance on government in Europe at the time. And in fact, I mean, if you think about it, when the government is relying, when you're completely reliant on the government, and the government knows that, the government wants to impose more and more. This is not the book, this is me speaking, which makes sense why there was a state-sponsored religion, right? They wanted to control everything. Any questions so far? I went a lot faster than I thought I was going to, which reminds me of a joke that my wife doesn't like me telling, but I'm going to tell it anyway. And I believe this came from Billy Graham back in his days of preaching. Some of you will tell me who the real person is if it's not Billy Graham, but I really think I read it in Just As I Am. A long time ago. When Billy Graham started preaching, he was given his first sermon. As a class assignment, he had to write another sermon. Then one of his professors gave him a third sermon because they wanted him to practice sermon delivery, things like that. And so he got called to preach at a church just for fill-in time. And we probably should have stopped recording. I don't know if Roy will enjoy this joke. Anyway, so he goes and he takes his watch off because he knows how much time he has to speak, and he delivers the first sermon that went really fast. He delivered the second sermon that went really fast. He delivered the third sermon that went really fast. He did each sermon 3 times, and then his time was up. And he thought, I really need to work on this. I could have taken my time. I could have spent more time on this. So he starts street preaching. Okay, because he's an evangelical. I mean, we know who Billy Graham is. He was great at this, right? So he starts street preaching, and he's working on timing. He's working on material, and he gets a heckler, and the heckler wants to know, who did Cain marry? Anybody yet? No, nobody's heard this. Who did Cain marry? He ignores him. Okay, he doesn't want to get into that theological question. The guy gets louder and louder and starts drawing the crowd. Billy Graham goes, I tell you what, when I get to heaven, I'll ask him. Okay? Guy goes, what if he's not in heaven? Billy says, then you ask him. Okay. If that was not Billy, it could have been Billy. Why do I tell that joke? Because I went a lot faster than I should have. We still have time.
The king thing, didn't they go, the king just kind of take over the whole, that's the basis of the revolution. The king came and said they owned all the land, right?
Yeah.
So the Indians were, isn't that why they pushed them off the land? That's based, a lot of the way they treated the Indians based on the king and him.
Yeah, so
they get into this, they're blaming the pilgrims and all that, when it was this one person over there saying we own all the land.
Yeah, yeah.
So the blame should be on the king,
Yep.
not the colonists.
yeah,
But they
so
don't do that.
agreed. So
Yeah,
when you look at
the king.
what was happening in Virginia, the first slide that I showed, I wanted to show that there were actually Christians coming to Virginia as well. Okay, the Pilgrims, they commissioned their own ships to come across. Okay, they weren't coming for a government. Okay, in Virginia they were coming for a government. They were sending people over for different reasons, many of whom were Christians and helped lay the groundwork. So not everybody, there are a lot of really good people that were coming to Virginia for some of the exact same reasons why the Pilgrims and the Puritans were coming to Virginia. But the mindset was different, okay? It's because the king was coming over for different things, okay? So, in fact, all the countries that came over as countries were coming over for our prosperity, for trade, for gold, okay? That's the difference, okay? Christians were coming over, it was more like with Columbus, it was more mission related. The Pilgrims and the Puritans were coming over because they wanted the freedom, but part of their rooted beliefs is spreading the gospel, is education, right? So you have both of those happening, and then you have the king coming in, and he has declared the land for the king, for England. You are absolutely correct. And so with that, you just go in and you take it, okay? And they've got many ships coming over. They're bringing in hundreds of people at a time, right? So the settlement is growing, even though in Virginia they really do not know how to work the land. One thing that's interesting in Virginia, they weren't really bringing trades with them. Okay, they were depending on Europe and the government, and so if you were successful, you weren't necessarily coming over. Okay, so they did not have a lot of the trades that say the Pilgrims were picking up communities and bringing them. They were bringing everything with them, including knowledge. They needed help, but they still had a skill set. In fact, one thing that both of the colonies had in common, they both started off sharing from a social standpoint, they were sharing everything. So it was kind of socialistic, both of them, but real quick, when the Pilgrims and Puritans saw that some people weren't pulling their weight, they corrected it immediately. Virginia, it took a long time. People were starving to death, okay? And they basically had to have someone come and tell them, you've got to get to work. They had to make it. Sorry?
Work for your food.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what they were saying. Work for your food. So yes, you're right. And so then they kept pushing and taking and pushing and taking. You really don't hear about them trying to buy the land like you do up in the Northeast with the Puritans and the Pilgrims, where they were really working in harmony together and saw themselves as equals. I skipped this on Columbus as well. When he landed, he immediately saw how smart, how well resourced the friendly tribe was, and he immediately saw them as equals and wanted to treat them as equals. His shipmates didn't have the same view as he did. Okay, so again, that was more an indictment of Spain than it was Columbus himself. But you're correct. The king was pushing a lot of the growth and expansion into places he didn't want.
A lot of the resources go back to England. if they got any gold or anything, it went back, that's what they're, whatever.
For them it was, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah, and you have to remember, it's 150 years from this time to the revolution, so it was a long, slow evolution in the country.
Long, slow, but people constantly coming. In fact, when the Pilgrims first started getting their footing and started getting harvests coming in, I mean, a group of people just showed up in a boat from Europe, you know, ate, got well rested, and left before winter came without doing anything. But yet they still persevered, they still were able to survive, they still were able to. So I think that I always had the thought that, you know, 1 or 2 ships a year kind of a thing, but no, it was people, once Virginia started really colonizing, ships started coming more frequently, much more frequently.
Including slaves.
Including slaves. So, okay, you made a point that I want to come back to. In fact, there's a map in the book that actually it was quite known that this is going to be very hard for you to see, but it's a map of the U.S. and from the Pilgrims and the Puritans, there's a symbolic tree of God's blessings. Okay. And then here where the Virginia is left, there's really a God's curse and slavery's in big bold letters. So there's a lot of, and by the way, that's from 1818, that's a wall map showing the positive effect of the original Plymouth philosophy as well as the negative effects of the original Jamestown philosophy. So you're right, including slavery, okay, which would not have been what the Puritans and the Pilgrims would have viewed as something that would have been good. But if you can get cheap labor and you're after prosperity, then slavery would be something that you would view as a good thing. We will get into slavery in this class. Again, that's not to say that everything that came out of Virginia was bad. It certainly is not. We got George Washington, who came out of Virginia. A lot of people, and I will say that I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. George Washington actually mentioned that. I feel better reading it. He said, if I'm going to paraphrase, after the war, he said he essentially said that God's hand in providence over the war would be something like an evil person would not see it, but for him it almost calls him into priesthood, okay, because it was just so obvious to him. And again, that's what we're trying to show. We're trying to show these golden arcs through history. That's what the Bartons are trying to show, these golden arcs through history. I told Rory, I said, reading this book has really made me a lot. I grew up very patriotic. Okay, my dad served in the military for a short time. Both of my grandparents did. My uncles did. We always had flags waving. We always went to the 4th of July show. I'm not going to say I lost some of that, but in reading this book, it has given me a much deeper appreciation for our country, and the fact that I know that as long as we protect our Constitution, we protect our Bible, we will have freedoms. Okay, we will be able to share the gospel freely. We will be able to worship freely, and this is really connecting some dots that were not connected for me in the past. So if there's nothing else I can do, give you a summary of what's in the book, but if you're so compelled, it's a really good read.
One other thing on Columbus that this young lady was talking about was that his desire for gold was driven by the desire to give it to Spain so that they could free Jerusalem from the conquest of the Muslims.
You're exactly right, yeah.
So it wasn't just greed, it was really inspired to do something good from a Christian perspective.
And that is in the book as well. Did you get that from the book or Jordy? Okay, yeah. Yep. Good.
Somebody else said someone bring up that he might have been Jewish. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I
he,
heard
he
that.
might have been Jewish, that's why he left. There's this, I mean, I don't know where it is, maybe I read there, somewhere else.
I know that Columbus
Might have been Jewish, that's why he left.
I don't recall reading that in this book, but what I will tell you that it was abundantly clear to me is Columbus was very well versed in his Bible, and he wrote, okay? So we have what he wrote, and they used what he wrote in this book. So we can rest in knowing that he was a Christian. He was coming over to spread the gospel. It really was a mission trip for him. And you can see that in how he named the different places where he landed. They're all either biblical names or there would be a name that a Christian would give a town.
So, I don't know if they brought it, I also got up that the word Jewish people also come in here. 'Cause